What's that one thing that you thought would be easy about running a biotech company that turned out to be an absolute nightmare?
Was getting the right people. So that was much more challenging than I think I ever would have predicted.
10 years ago, as a resident, you actually believed that every medical decision was based on the best available evidence and focused on best for the patient. And now you know that's not always true. What broke that belief for you?
Nothing you do in that setting, it's kind of the most pure medicine there is. Nothing you do as a resident in training is dictated by cost. And it might be a kind of naive lens that you get to wear in that training period, but you're essentially just trying to get patients the best possible treatments as quick as you can.
This product definitely has a value add, a big one. That made you say, this is why we're doing this.
Love hearing straight from the patients what their experience was, and we have a lot of those cases from the past, and that's really where it gets the most exciting for me.
You spoke about grant money versus investors and VC money. What, especially in terms of biotech, what gives you more wings for creativity, experimentation? Welcome to the best AI show on Pharma. I am Ayush Mishra, and tonight I'm talking to someone who makes my career pivot look really boring. Dr. Ned Swanson, President and CMO at Polarity Bio. This guy left a Johns Hopkins plastic surgery residency to start a biotech. Took it public while still wearing scrubs. And now he's regenerating human skin like it's science fiction. Harvard MD, Penn Bioengineering, and brutally honest about his opinion on AI, which is exactly why he is here. Ned, welcome to the show. How's life treating you?
Life's great right now, and thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Awesome. So, as we were talking before we hit record, Johns Hopkins to a biotech co-founder, right? Does your former co-residents think you are crazy, or do they think you're brilliant? Or are they still deciding?
I think they're probably still deciding. I'm not sure. I've tried to take a pulse. I saw a bunch of them recently at a wedding, and I think they're all interested to see where it goes. But I think they're still holding their final judgments until we get this thing all the way through, probably.
So here's what I want to know. You are in residency. You see this skin regeneration tech, and you decide to sort of leave one of the best programs in the world. There's so many people who would give a limb for that. Was there a single conversation or a moment where you thought, I'm doing this, or was it like more like a slow burn where you could not do it?
I think it was both, to be honest. It was never anything I imagined doing with my career. I went into plastic surgery residency and went to Hopkins because I wanted to do academic research and be a surgeon. So that was the place doing some of the most exciting research in our field at the time, including face and hand transplant research was one of the big draws as to why I wanted to go there. And, ultimately this opportunity to launch Polarity Bio kind of came out of thin air. One of my co-residents had invented the technology to regenerate tissue, not just skin, but certainly he had done the most work in skin, which was obviously right in our wheelhouse as to what we were seeing every day, trying to reconstruct wounds. And he got thrown in the room with some venture capitalists. It was never his intention either. It was kind of a family connection. And he came back to Hopkins, told me all about it, and the light bulb kind of went off right then. He and I, as well as my current partner, who was also at Hopkins with us, who's still at the company with us, always intended to be doing research that would help patients, right? Like within our lifetime, we wanted to translate a discovery into a tangible product. And at that point, even though we were still just residents, we had been kind of in the game for years, you know, going back to college, med school, etc. And those two guys both had PhDs. We had done a lot of academic research. It didn't really look like there was a real fast path to getting anything to actually affect patients in that world, but we didn't know anything about biotech industry and how to develop products on that side of the fence, and, you know, kind of got our eyes open to it rather quickly. And I think it was everything we had imagined growing up as the right path to do what we had always wanted to do. So it was a little bit less pivoting our careers and more realizing this is actually what we always wanted to do. This is the fastest way to get products to patients and to actually work on the research you want to be doing. You know, a lot of times in academic research, grants chase prior results, and suddenly 10, 20 years later, someone's, you know, the expert in a very narrow field that they never intended to be going down, but that's just where the grant money flowed, versus you bring it to a biotech to develop it on the industry side. Ultimately, you're raising money around the project you want to pursue. Obviously, that project needs to be a certain level of advanced, but you're not going to get tied down to things that aren't going anywhere. You know, it's ultimately your guiding principle is to fail quickly and iterate and develop quickly. So kind of all the things I think we disliked about academic research. With all that said, you know, even though the light bulb went off kind of immediately when the opportunity arose, it took us a couple of years to put the deal together, to find a deal that we were comfortable with to leave residency and pursue. And, you know, throughout those 2 years of pursuing the deal, there certainly was kind of that slow burn you're talking about of, you know, if we find it, are we really doing this? And by the time the deal materialized, you know, we were all in, you know, knowing it was a big risk, but also knowing if we could take this technology, which ultimately had only been in mice at that point. So, you know, how a mouse heals a wound versus how a human heals a wound are very different. So there was no guarantees of this. If we could turn what was occurring in the prior research into a real product, we were looking at patients all day long who needed something, you know, that didn't exist. So ultimately, you know, that was the reason and the motivation to take this path, and definitely loved operating, and definitely, you know, missed the idea of being in the OR and being a surgeon. But on the research side, you know, it couldn't be more exciting than doing it in this manner versus, you know, what I think we were looking at in our prior career paths.
So when you know, when you and your co-founder and partner at the time, you guys were thinking, you know, let's start this. Was there you know, a devil's advocate or a voice at the back of your head saying, "Ned, don't do that"?
It was saying don't do it every time a deal got put on the table that looked like it could be a risky move. You know, whether that was not enough money to get to the next milestone, a lot of bells and whistles that would strip control away. You know, those were the moments where it was, we can't do this. As exciting as this sounds, we got something on the table. We can't throw away the past to pursue this with, you know, not enough reassurance that it's going to go forward. So, you know, I think once the final deal came through that had everything we were looking for, that voice didn't exist anymore.
Awesome. So, you know, you spoke about grant money versus, you know, investors and VC money. What, especially in terms of biotech, what gives you more wings for creativity, experimentation? You know, is there a difference, you know, when you do it with grant money versus VC money?
To me, a big difference is once you get your grant money, you got to pursue that project to the end and just exhaust everything you possibly can to make the project that was proposed work. Where, you know, you could find out very early on, this isn't the path, you know, we want to pursue something different, and you're kind of handcuffed by what you got the grant money for. So, you know, in biotech, obviously you're pursuing the ultimate goal you've set, but how you get there isn't going to be dictated by, you know, what you predicted when you started the project. It's going to be dictated by what's working, what's not working, and how the field's evolving. So I think the creativity and the biotech side of things comes in once you're off to the races. It's a much, much different operation than when you pull in a grant. I think the areas where it's similar is you ultimately need to get through all those stages, whether it's what you planned with the grant or what you planned out to develop in biotech. It's not like we can just suddenly pursue some other tissue and abandon all the progress we've made on skin. We're going to stay laser focused and pursue that goal, but it's kind of a broader goal with no path defined as to how you're going to get there.
So, founder's confession time. I'm a founder myself. So I need to ask you this. What's that one thing that you thought would be easy about running a biotech company that turned out to be an absolute nightmare? And also the flip side, what surprised you the most in the other direction?
Yeah, I think looking back, we've been doing this for 9 years. We've had a lot of different phases of this company. I think the one thing that still stands out to me as being the most difficult thing of building and growing a biotech is getting the right people. So that was much more challenging than I think I ever would have predicted. You can interview someone, they can have a great resume, they can have seemingly the best experience, and they get in, it's not a right fit for whatever reason. The experience didn't quite line up with, you're in the startup biotech. Frankly, no one's really done what we've done before. And every day you find out that's more and more true. You can't just carbon copy an experience onto innovating something new. So sometimes the experience, if the people aren't willing to kind of get outside their comfort zone or the box that they've built for themselves, doesn't fit, or it's culture fit, what have you, and really how to handle that. Do you hunker down and try to train and educate and, pull them towards the direction you need? Is it something where you need to move on quickly for both parties? And it's really become easier over time, not just with that experience, but the bigger network you build within your space, the more you can rely on people who have worked with other people that are going to be great. So I've found it easier over time because of the network that gets built, where if you have someone that's a rock star,
yeah,
and they want to bring someone in they had worked with for 10 years in the past,
yeah,
there's a little bit less question to that in my mind versus someone you've never met, no one's ever met, and you're really kind of making a bet on. Let's be honest, you can drag someone through 3 interviews, 4 interviews, but that's not going to tell you anything compared to when they get in the company. So that's still an ongoing challenge, and I think we all think about it a lot. But you got to balance that against you get so far along of needing help that you didn't bring in because of those reasons that it becomes challenging to train people because everyone's overloaded with work. So I think that remains the biggest challenge.
When we hire engineers and folks like that who are fresh out of college or have built something in the past, and especially in the tech space, because it is sort of heating up, there is a lot of push. Even with my own company, that we have to build, and we have to build it fast. We have to build responsibly but fast. And AI engineers understand that part. And there are enough benchmarks around the world. Steve Jobs was known to yell at people, and you know all that, right?
Yeah.
Is that the same template you can run in a biotech company where you have PhDs and sophisticated scientists? And I'm just trying to get some juicy gossip.
Yeah, I think you hear all those stories about these hyper successful founders who, like Steve Jobs, built Apple or whatever. A lot more examples, I think, from the tech industry.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to put on that. I think I used to pay attention to how did these people do it more.
Yeah.
But then you got to wonder, what was it really like in the early stages? Because we're not in the
Too early stages.
We're Apple looking back of what was it like. We're in the early stages where, honestly, I think you need to be very cognizant of when you come down hard on people in the company, because if you do it very, very sparingly, and not in like in an aggressive, abrasive way, just when people know the flip seems to have switched to a different mindset,
Yeah.
it'll be listened to more when it rarely ever happens or paid attention to more, versus, if you're doing that all the time, it just becomes noise that gets ignored. It just makes a tense culture, stressed out culture, and nobody's listening to the message anyhow when it's the common tone of how it's being handled. So, ultimately, I think that's the hard part of hiring, is you're looking for people that hold themselves accountable as much as you do. And there's not going to need to be a ton of that micromanagement going on. So, I think someone fresh out of college or fresh out of a PhD is a much different animal than someone who's been working for 20 years and you're trying to figure out, if this is going to be a good fit.
I mean, as far as we are concerned, working with someone who has built things for 20 years, it's, I prefer I work with fresh out of college PhDs. I mean, there's, but I do understand with life sciences, it should be very different. You have to rely on experience there.
There's a ton of experience needed. I mean, if you think of the life cycles of the products, it's hard to have numerous product development or launches under your belt without being in the industry for a while. So you can't just go blind with a team of total novices, right? So it's probably a little bit more of that balance in biotech. And then when I think about, managing that culture, how to lead, ultimately we've found the most success in just keeping the vision of why we're doing what we're doing at the forefront. So, a lot of people in the company aren't as connected to what's going on in a trial, what's going on with the clinical use of the product, some of the exciting stories we hear. So we try to bring that back to everyone in the company as much as we can. And, I'd much rather repetitively hit that. What's our vision? What's our reason for being here? As opposed to focusing on, did you get your task done, at light speed? That'll come naturally if people remember why they're doing it, because the day-to-day can be a grind for everybody in the company. And it's very easy to lose sight of why we're doing this. I mean, you shouldn't be in a startup biotech unless you have that motivation to really change something, in the world to help patients, whether it's very small or very large as your vision. There's no point to being in a startup biotech if that isn't your ultimate motivation, because you can do a lot of the same stuff at a lot of different companies. Why would you be a CFO of a biotech? You can be a CFO of anything. Even the people in the finance, department still see it as affecting the world in a positive way, being in a biotech versus some other kind of business.
Why are you doing it? What keeps you going on the hard days? I mean, is it just a kind of founder stubbornness that I have to build this, or is it the science, or is it something else?
It's really bringing a new technology to the market to help patients. I mean, I don't know how to make it any simpler than that. And we set out on a big goal. I mean, anything you want to accomplish in life, right? Like, there's no one who's been hyper successful at anything that hasn't had to keep that motivation, to enjoy the journey. So what's going to motivate you every day to be enjoying the journey of ups and downs and the roller coaster ride of a startup? Is all it is for me. And, not quitting. So if you look at anything, I look at sports a lot. So, if you look at a Michael Jordan, a Wayne Gretzky, a Tom Brady, it's all the same exact stuff they say that comes out of their mouth, and it has nothing to do with sports. It's all about how to manage your life and go about your work. And if you're not the one who loves shooting 1,000 basketballs or shooting 1,000 pucks, you're not going to become those people. So, you got to find something you love doing day to day, which I love the science. I love the innovation. I love the idea of moving something along to help people, but the ultimate goal, we'll get to where we get to, but you need to enjoy what you're doing in the daytime. So, I think the science and the innovation keeps it exciting every single day, with the ultimate goal at the end of the tunnel being, can we actually pull off what we set out to do?
I I I can't agree more with you. And building a biotech company isn't just building a startup, right? It's a responsibility in itself, and it's easier said than done most of the time, because of course there's the right thing to say, but then to every biotech founder, I respect a biotech founder much more, because purely because of two reasons. The problems that they're solving, it takes years if they solve the problem, right? And that's a huge commitment. So obviously, that commands more respect. Uh, you and I have to ask you this, because you mentioned sports and basketball. Who do you think is the greatest of all times? And that's you know,
For basketball,
yeah.
I'll preface this with, I'm not a huge basketball guy. I use Jordan as an example there, but from everything I've seen, I don't know how it's not Jordan. It, I just can't imagine making an argument any other way. And
Yes.
if you're gonna go any other way than Jordan, I think there are guys before him you could look at. I don't think LeBron's got anything even close to what Jordan does. Kobe, you could argue, was pretty similar, but
Yeah. I get into debates. So I'm based in India, but unlike all my other peers who play cricket, I actually played basketball in school. And I get into these debates, and the kids these days is all about Kobe Bryant, and but I don't think they can be a Jordan, right?
no,
Just
I don't.
to go viral then.
I don't think there's going to be another one, and I think it's always been him. The conversations, I guess people enjoy having the debate, but for me. I grew up playing hockey, and there's not as much of a debate with Wayne Gretzky, but I don't see him getting surpassed by anyone, at least in my lifetime.
Oh, so you play hockey, right?
I did, yeah.
Tough sport.
Yeah, it's a good sport. It's good sport to learn a lot about life. With all the contact, you're basically training to be a warrior out there. So
Yeah.
I pull a lot from pursuing hockey into what I've done since I've stopped playing, because those guys, if you look at the NHL players, they'll play through anything, which is pretty admirable. They know how to handle adversity, they know how to handle injuries, and it's a pretty tough mind game to be in that. So I think it's been helpful well beyond just sports in my life.
Wow. As a scientist, a doctor, a founder, you play hockey. I would assume your Tinder matches must be off the roofs.
My what?
Your Tinder matches must be off the roof.
Oh, no, I'm happily married with a bunch of kids. I don't think I've opened that app before.
You haven't?
No, yeah, I was married before that thing came out.
Sorry to hear that, Ned. All right, so let's talk about what you're building. So Skin Tea is in phase 3 for diabetic foot ulcers, if I'm not wrong. So
Correct.
I'm not a surgeon, so explain it to me. What's happening? What are you building that's different from how wound care works today?
Yeah, so our product Skin Tea starts with a piece of the patient's own skin. So it's made from their own skin. They take a small piece, it gets sent to our company that's headquartered in Salt Lake City, and we make Skin Tea the following day. So we turn that sample of full thickness skin into a product that is very much like an oatmeal consistency, and it gets loaded in a syringe, and it goes back to the provider, and they put it on the wound within 10 days of taking that original skin sample. And the product Skin TE, which is completely made of their own skin, then adheres and engrafts to the wound. So essentially it gets a blood supply from the wound, and then it's able to start growing within the wound to, hopefully if everything goes according to plan, close the wound. And the big difference of what we're doing versus what existed in the past is there's traditional skin grafts. So skin grafts have been around for, 4,000 years. I think the first historical record of a skin graft was actually from your neck of the woods in India. There's a drawing of it. So they've been around for a while. Ultimately, with the normal skin graft, you just take the top layer of skin and then you transfer that to the wound, and where you took the skin from heals on its own because you just took the top layer. It's like having a road rash on your leg if you skin your knee, the place where they take the skin. But all it can really do is create that barrier to close the wound, and it loses all the functions of skin that happen in the deeper layers. So your hair follicles, your glands, blood vessels, nerve endings, those are all in the deeper layers of skin. So we start with a piece of full thickness skin. So we get all the layers of skin. And another important part is that's where all the regenerative populations are. So all the stem cells of the skin are mostly in the deeper layers that can regrow all the skin. They're actually mostly in the hair follicles. So if you really want to regenerate the full thickness functional skin, you need to start with all of the layers. So that's the difference of what we're doing versus traditional skin grafts.
Mm-hmm.
And then with a traditional skin graft, they actually don't work well in certain areas of the body. And one is on the foot, and definitely one is a diabetic foot. So diabetic foot ulcers happen because people with diabetes over time lose sensation in their feet. They can have sort of mechanical problems in their foot where they get more pressure points, which is kind of a lethal combo for the skin. So you can't feel that you're putting more pressure on a certain spot, and they don't notice a little tiny opening occurs, and then by the time they might notice, it's a full-blown wound. And that problem doesn't go away. Just because you know you have a wound, you don't have the pain signals to tell you to get off of it like everyone else. So just because you know you have a wound doesn't mean now suddenly you're able to manage and heal it very, very quickly. So they can turn into chronic wounds. And once you're in that stage, it's a whole different ballgame where, you can have infection, biofilm, so bacteria is not really an infection, but it builds up. And there's poor blood supply in there. So you need blood supply to heal. So with all those factors, normal skin grafts don't work great on the bottom of the foot. And, one thing Skin TE does to help overcome that is to make the product, we take that full thickness piece of skin and we turn it into these small multicellular units. So essentially 2 millimeters or less in size with multiple cell types. And the reason we go down to that size is it can live off of the wound fluid. So it can get nutrients and dispose of waste just living in the fluid of the wound before it gets a blood supply. So essentially you have a little bit more time for that piece of skin that's very small to connect and get a blood supply to then start growing, versus a skin graft. If you think about it, as soon as you take it off the body, you're in a race. That thing's trying to die and you're trying to get it a blood supply. So we've tipped the balance of that race where it can survive longer before it gets a blood supply. And the blood supply it needs is just a capillary, versus a big skin graft needs, essentially a full pipe of a blood vessel to gain a blood supply. So those are just some of the factors that are different for diabetic foot ulcers. The product has actually been used in 1,300 wounds of all types. When you get into the larger wounds, we can actually expand the original skin sample. So if you take a 1 square centimeter size of skin, in our preclinical studies and clinical cases, it's been able to expand up to 20 times that size reliably. So it also tips the balance in those wounds, because a normal skin graft, you can really only expand 2 or 4 to 1 the size of what you take. And we're then able to expand it even greater than that. So it has some different features that are helpful in different areas. And then if you look at not skin grafts, so not doing a surgical procedure, there's a lot of products out there, made from animals, made from other human donors, or made from synthetics like collagen. But since it's not your own body, those are all temporary solutions. So it may stimulate the wound to close, but ultimately you're going to have to apply it again to keep trying to stimulate it to close, because your body just rejects it. The body eventually sees it as not your own, and in a week or two rejects it off the body or replaces it. So ultimately, with all that said, we're trying to combine the power of using your own tissue, like skin grafting, and turn it into a product that's as convenient as possible. So with our product, you take the skin sample, 10, 15-minute procedure, and then a week later you have the product back. That at that point, it feels like a product coming off the shelf. It's just a 10, 15-minute procedure to put it on and dress it. And we're not growing it in the lab. So we don't culture it. We don't expand it in the lab. And therefore, we're able to get it back quickly. So we're trying to find a solution that could take the tissue engineering principles of let's optimize your own tissue to regrow an organ, but we're actually letting that organ, the skin, grow on the patient instead of in the lab. So, for a lot of different reasons, it brings something much different to the table that fits somewhere in between big reconstructive procedures, and the off-the-shelf products.
As a matter of fact, I met a terrible accident myself in 2007, and so I have a lot of skin grafts on my left leg. And then there's a portion where I don't feel anything. So and they took a graft, as a doctor explained to me that time, that took a graft from my own skin. They grafted it. There are some places, as he said, kind of a road rash situation, and then there is some where I actually don't feel anything. I mean, even if I prick a syringe, I won't feel anything. If I would have used your tech, how would have been that better?
So, skin TE, I gotta just say up front, is for investigational use only with the FDA. We're going through the pre-market phase towards approval, so I can't make any claims of what it could or couldn't do. But ultimately, what you're describing is some of the motivation of developing this product. So, in your case, not a diabetic foot ulcer where all the sensation's been gone forever, right? So very common for a normal skin graft to not have normal sensation like you're describing. Because as we said, it doesn't have the nerve endings when they transplant it. And, with our product, we actually have a case report of a patient who had a skin graft. He was in a motorcycle accident, I believe.
Yep.
Had wounds on both his legs. Both legs got skin grafted at the time, but it only worked on one leg. So he had a skin graft healed wound on one leg, and then months later, they used skin TE on the other side where it hadn't worked. And then once skin TE had healed, they compared sensation between the legs, and the skin TE skin had the same sensation as his normal leg skin. But the old skin graft that had worked, kind of like your situation, had diminished sensation. It wasn't totally numb, but it was not to the precision that he was feeling on his normal skin. So, we have some preliminary evidence that in certain situations it may be able to help bring back normal sensation. But, in our current indication with diabetic foot ulcers, we tested this in our phase 2 study. They just don't have sensation to begin with around the wound or anywhere on their foot. So even if the skin is able to regrow and close the wound, it's hard to restore normal sensation that isn't there to receive it. So we didn't see a huge difference in the sensation return in that case, but it's different if you're talking about, a healthy person with normal sensation that has a different type of wound.
Yeah, I get it. This is and as someone who has already gone through skin grafting before, I can tell you, what you just mentioned. Once this is in market, this product definitely has a value add, a big one. So I mean, more power to you guys and the team.
No, I appreciate that. It's definitely helpful. Unfortunate you had to go through that, but helpful for you to understand what we're going after by having that experience.
I do. I actually went through an amputation as well. It was a terrible accident. Uh, so I lost. I did an amputation above knee on my left leg, and so there's a there's a large variety of grafts that they've used on both the legs here and there. So yeah, I mean, and hence I relate to the product a lot. I before coming on this interview, I did not realize that this is something that I could understand well. So, but yeah, I get it, and I can tell you, this is a this is a real thing. This is a real thing. You also just launched an expanded access program, I think, a few months back, and that feels like a big moment, obviously. And then you're getting the product into patients' hands, I think, before the full approval, right? So
Yeah, so we just finished the phase 3 trial in November. The last patient last visit happened. Right now we're collecting all the data from that trial, and we have a bunch of meetings with the FDA, and if everything goes according to plan, we'll be filing for our BLA approval next spring. But in the interim, it takes them months to review after we file, so we're looking at least a year before we have a decision from the FDA. And we wanted to keep providing access to patients in the interim, which we put together, as you said, an expanded access program with the FDA where, it's pretty similar to a trial protocol, but, gives patients access between now and their final decision with the same types of wounds. The other thing we're doing that for is, within the trial, very specific criteria to be included in the trial. And we're trying to expand that out, before any future launch where patients with other criteria coming in can get the product. So, often patients with kidney failure are allowed in these wound trials just to keep the patients uniform. And, that's one thing that we've added on they can have coming into the expanded access program, because a lot of patients with diabetes and diabetic foot ulcers have kidney failure. And then, we're doing bigger wound sizes. So kind of creeping more towards what this will look like, hopefully upon approval and launch, if that's the direction we get to go.
Awesome. Do you see? I mean, do you have a case study, a patient case study, which you saw most recently, that made you say, this is why we're doing this, as much as you can share. I mean.
Yeah, I mean they come in fairly often, and I think what is more exciting than essentially seeing the case and deciding myself, how great it was or wasn't, is the patient's voice, coming from their own experience. And recently, when we announced that we finished the phase 3 trial, we got a quote from a patient, and they were thrilled they were able to be in the trial and get the treatment and healed their wound. And they're saying that they hope we have success as we pursue this FDA path and the product can be available to other patients. So, I always love hearing straight from the patients what their experience was. And, we have a lot of those cases from the past, and, that's really where it gets the most exciting for me. But certainly there were a handful of cases in the trial that were extremely exciting to see the product perform in, and we hope to be able to get that out to more and more patients.
Let me make a segue here. Because I mean, it's getting exciting in my mind more. you know, for your future big investor, if he's seeing this podcast, can you talk a bit about how big do you think is this market? In terms of numbers, if you have some brief numbers.
Yeah, I mean, the wound market, you can find numbers all day long. It's a massive market. So if you just look at chronic wounds, there's about 8 to 10 million just in the United States every year. And, you can multiply those numbers by 10 or more if you're going worldwide. So, Diabetic foot ulcers is one of the largest needs in the industry. It's why we started there. If we just stayed focused on that, for the life of the product, that is a very, very large need in the industry. As you heard, 8 to 10 million, probably 2 million of those are diabetic foot ulcers every year in the US. But, with our experience treating over 1,300 patients of all wound types.
So you mean 2 to 4 million surgeries for diabetic foot ulcers in US every year, right?
The 2 to 4 million diabetic foot ulcers form every year, whether or not they are wounds that end up needing surgery. A lot of them are managed just in the office, but yeah, about 2 million diabetic foot ulcers every year in the US. You'll see different numbers, but what that translates to, I think is even more eye-opening. Every 30 seconds, a diabetic foot ulcer forms in the US, or every 20 to 30 seconds, a diabetic foot ulcer forms. Every 3.5 minutes, there's an amputation that was preceded by a diabetic foot ulcer. So this is going to happen numerous times while we're just doing this podcast. I think that puts it in a little bit more of a tangible idea of what's going on just in that one wound type. And then you spread this into every wound type, it's going to have a certain niche where it provides value or doesn't. In different wound types, there's about 500 million wounds a year in the world. So, if you go outside the US and you go into other wounds, this is sort of a never-ending need. And these aren't all chronic wounds. Once you get outside of chronic wounds, we're talking about ones that are coming and going all the time. And, if you can deliver a solution to help these patients, it'll be a never-ending faucet of a pipeline. So when we launched the company, the technology actually could be used to regenerate any tissue, bone, muscle, you name it.
Oh.
And we actually had to put in some discipline to stay focused on skin because we have a product we've seen promise in, and as you just heard, this is a pipeline that just keeps going and going with wounds, where we're going to stay laser focused on skin and really try to get the full potential out of this one product before we were ever to take it to another tissue type, even though we had started a lot of development in bone and a little bit in muscle.
Yeah. So, this looks like a massive market, and then you have, a lot of subsets in the market. You are currently focused on one subset, which is diabetic foot ulcer, and obviously, this has implications even in emergency wounds, accidental wounds, cases like myself. How do you think? So I'm just trying to get AI into this piece, right? That's what the podcast is. How do you think AI can augment, taking a product like this from where it is today to the patient who needs it? Can you kind of paint a picture where you see technology at any place or multiple places helping guys like you to sort of blow this up?
Yeah, I think, as you heard me speak about what we're doing in the product, we're just heavily focused on the biology, right? Like there's no obvious place to insert AI into our actual product. But when you look at what we're trying to accomplish, AI can be surrounding what we're doing in a lot of different ways. I think one way is how wounds are actually being managed and how they're being tracked. There are a ton of companies right now that have AI imaging. So take a picture of the wound, tells you how big it is, might tell you other things about the wounds. Some of them can actually determine what the blood flow is there bacteria in the wound. So really monitoring the progress will potentially be able to define with certain devices, what wound is needing skin T and what wound is ready for it. So has it been prepped and cleaned and ready to get a product put on the wound is, a huge piece. And then tracking those outcomes by taking images and not just measuring with a ruler. So that's taking off. We use all of that in our trials. So we always have imaging devices measuring the wound every single week the patient comes in. And then I think if you also look at what we just talked about, we're trying to get from just diabetic foot ulcers towards all these other indications. How can we do that most efficiently? So there's a lot of recent development in using real world evidence or using AI to make a matched control cohort where you may not have to run a randomized trial. So there's a lot of wound indications where running a randomized control trial is very difficult. If you think of traumatic wounds, like you were just describing, you experienced, every single one of those is very different than the other. And to try to think you can just randomize it out even is very challenging. So could you just run a single arm with the treatment and then find a big enough matched cohort to run the trial more efficiently in a manner the FDA is going to accept? So there are companies now that can do that and validate how they pull all the data out so it can actually be audited. That never existed before. So regulators can start having a little more confidence in allowing those trial designs to occur if they know they can actually trace back to how it was all done. So can you get through your pipeline and life cycle development faster? And another huge piece is, we're really trying to transform this market into a totally different field of medicine. We need to know what's happening with these patients. Right now, there is no good comprehensive knowledge of what makes someone get a diabetic foot ulcer. Once you have one, how do you know what your chances of healing it are? What are the chances of the complications? And how do all the treatments fit into that picture? So there's no complete snapshot of multiple years before the ulcer forming, treatments, and years later, what has occurred. So we've put a ton of effort into putting that all together and talked to numerous companies that, have AI solutions using EMR data, using claims data, and, ultimately had to make a lot of decisions about what direction we were going to go on that front. But I think that field is rapidly evolving. We're not actually pursuing really an AI solution to put that together right now.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have anyone prove through some feasibility studies they could pull it off. So we're taking a little bit more of a traditional approach for that project, but I know in, 2-3 years from now, we probably could have been doing that project in real time with much more data, with, a better representation of the entire market versus right now we're kind of focused just on Medicare patients because that's where you think we can pull this off the best. So I think tracking what's going on, what are the outcomes, what treatments work in what specific situation will help the field actually make decisions. If you look at oncology, it is loaded with data you can pull, from numerous public sources and really stratify down, what tumor is this, what therapies might target it. That's evolving, but it is light years ahead of where we are in wound care. And, we're hoping to go in that direction with wound care to really bring the data piece in to make, have everyone making informed decisions about what they're doing for the patient. And it's not based, off of factors outside of the actual evidence.
So, and this is really exciting because you mentioned real world evidence. That's all we do day in, day out. And we build a lot of AI on real world evidence on Komodo's data, as I told you in the beginning. What do you actually see, working in this setup? So, I mean, and let me give you a bit of a context. So, I was reading through your pre-discussion, and then you mentioned that about 2 to 3 years back there was nothing that was exciting in AI in life sciences, but then much more recently you have realized there are some use cases in AI. So what do you think is actually working in AI in pharma and biotech, and is that real world evidence, or is there a combination of more than that?
I think we're getting there with real world evidence. I think with certain fields of medicine, you could probably pull it off today.
Yeah.
With us in wound care, for a variety of factors, it's still very challenging to use the tools that exist to get the info you need based on how wounds are commonly coded for billing. That is a little bit of a mess. That doesn't provide the detail you need to really stratify patients. So you can have the best AI tool in the world, but the coding's not set up to actually reveal the info that you need. And then on the EMR side, all those details are in there, but it's very messy. So patients often have more than one wound at a time.
Yes.
So how do you know you're tracking the same wound?
Yes, yes.
Some people are more diligent about, saying how big it is, how deep it is, what the status is every single week, and labeling it, as wound 1 and wound 2 or however they're writing. But on the whole, what we couldn't get to was the confidence that the wound and patients that are being tracked are the same wound within the same patient using AI. We did a lot of feasibility where it would pull out the info we were looking for. And then when we probe deeper, there was no guarantee that it was actually doing it correctly. And it would have just resorted to a lot of manual quality check to the point where, it wouldn't really be feasible to do it with as many patients as we were trying to. I think you could do that in other fields where the coding data, the notes, all provide the info in a pretty clear way. So I think real world evidence is getting there. I think it's going to get there in wounds. There's a lot of momentum to change the codes. So a group that we're involved with, the Wound Care Collaborative community, is right now submitting proposed changes to get the coding lined up where you can get all the details you need from the day-to-day coding. And then they're also building, a pretty huge registry to get all of the detailed info about the wounds. So once the data exists, I think AI is there to make use of it, but you just need it to be available.
Oh, that is exciting.
Yeah.
Wow. So I didn't know about that. You also mentioned that obviously there are going to be so many people building AI pitching into you. You mentioned you use some partners to do some tasks here and there. If there is a startup in AI that's building something more meaningful, what are the things that would excite you, and what are the things that you think this is just buzzwords in the pitch?
Yeah, I think when I speak to different companies with different offerings, to answer the last part first, when the focus is on the buzzwords, on AI, on the features, on how we built the AI, how it functions, that's when the red flags start going up, where, I think the groups that instill a lot of confidence is, we may or may not use AI, but here's the problem you're facing. Here's how we're going to solve the problem for you. And here's some proof we've done it before. And, let's run a feasibility to see if we can do it for you too, for your problem, which is always going to be unique compared to what they've done before. So
Correct.
That's kind of the first pass in my head. And it's fine. I think the groups that are focused on the buzzwords and the features, they may not have the use cases yet to have the proof. But at that point, I think it would be helpful to kind of go in it together in a partnership and say, let's try to pull this off. And it can stand as a use case for you in the future. But, it's hard when there's no proof they can pull it off and they're trying to charge $200,000 as kind of a guinea pig test pilot run. So, I think if companies are going to try to charge tons of money to do a project, we're going to look for the ones that have done it before and can prove that they can pull it off for us. So, I think there's huge opportunity for a new startup company to go out and do some free work like we all have to do in biotech all the time. Like we're making no money right now. So, it feels a little goofy when we have to prove it, for 10 years with the FDA and we're being asked to pay for it, with a group that's at an earlier stage than we are.
Wow, this is going to go wild. You earlier said that you wish someone would sort of build a single centralized solution that tracks the full patient journey, for disease, um, casual factors, treatment sequences, outcomes, complications, predictors, everything sort of in one place, right?
Yeah.
So imagine that exists tomorrow, right? And it actually works, hypothetically. What's the first thing you would do with it at Polarity?
For the first thing I would do is what I was describing, where we're trying to put together in a smaller way right now, is first, let's get a snapshot of what's going on with these patients.
Yeah.
And not until you see that data can you even start to really dig in as to what's working, what's not working, and what should we do with the different types of patients we're seeing. So right now, patient walks in the door with a diabetic foot ulcer. Let's say I'm a doctor treating that patient. I've never met them. They come in, I'm going through all their history. I can't tell them based on their wound and based on all the other patient factors that are relevant to them. When do I think your wound's going to heal? If it's going to heal? And what are the chances that you end up in the hospital, you get an infection, you get an amputation, or, even worse, this thing could lead to your death. These are the complications of a diabetic foot ulcer. So first you need to see what that looks like across the entire population to then start drilling into, we know with this combination of patient and wound factors, you're in a different strata. So think of it like cancer staging.
Yeah.
You walk in the door and I'm going to measure all of these things of your wound and your history. And then I'm going to put you in a bucket of stage 1, 2, 3, 4. If we're just taking cancer staging as an example.
Yeah.
Then once we have those stratified, we can then try to dig into what treatments work within each of those patient buckets and try to really determine, as soon as a patient walks in the door, what treatment do you need? Right now in wound care,
Yeah.
almost every single treatment starts after a full month of just standard of care, just rudimentary dressings, infection management, offloading the wound. You need to do that for 4 weeks before anyone lets you get anything else. That's a pretty big amount of time
Yeah.
to just be waiting and watching. If we're really worried about wound closure, it would be nice to know you walk in my door, you're going to be fine with standard of care. That's all you need. You're probably going to be closed in 2 months, or you really need something different right now, whether that's the most advanced treatment or something in the middle. We know you need to move to something more than just moist dressings and offloading your wounds. So to me, that's front of mind, what I would do if that existed, and would want to be able to track it in real time. Where new treatments come out, start getting used, how do they start to fall into the picture? You shouldn't have 200 options to treat the same problem and not know which one to use at every single moment. So, there's always going to be interpretation and, discussion of risk benefits, but in most fields of medicine, you don't have 200 options for the same exact problem every day. So for me, being tunnel visioned in wound care, this is where I'm at, but this applies to everything, because every time a new treatment comes out for a disease, you don't have to wait 5 years to decide, did this work? Was it being used in the right patients? Should it be focused on a narrower subset, or should we actually be putting it all in a subset that we didn't actually see it getting used in a lot because that's where it was working? So the only way to do that is with real time. And I think the biggest example of real time tracking not going on, Medicare is now changing all the reimbursement for wound products. They said this year that in 2019, they spent $250 million on advanced wound care products or skin substitutes. In 2024, they spent $10 billion, and it's basically the same amount of patients getting treated. And the outcomes, haven't changed greatly with that spend. But that just slipped by in 5 years. Like how is that not being seen in real time over the course of those 5 years? Maybe it was, and it just takes this long to make a change. And in the meantime, the train continued to run. But, I think that's a huge example of not just for, biotechs, not just for the physicians and the patients, but even for payers. Like, you need to be seeing this whole picture all the time and seeing trends develop that are kind of out of left field in order to know if the right thing's actually being done. So 5 years ago, I wouldn't have said this is possible. But people have actually started bringing in enough data sources where I think the data's there. And as long as we can centralize it, to a degree where you don't have to have 6 different companies doing small pieces of the project,
Yeah.
it could be huge.
You also wrote something that kind of hit me, and then you said 10 years ago, as a resident, you actually believed that every medical decision was based on the best available evidence and focus on best for the patient, and now that's not always true.
Yeah.
What broke that belief for you?
So when you actually start getting in the weeds of how products are paid for, what incentives that might set up, and in our market, essentially the same products were priced 10x different. So there's a lot of sort of Me Too products that exist that at the end of the day are the same thing. And they were priced on a scale of, one might be $100 a square centimeter and one might be $5,000 a square centimeter for the same product. So if it's the same product, the decision of when and how to use it should be the same. And it's not what was seen in the industry.
Yeah.
And, the amount that reimbursement and payment dictates product success is eye-opening. I think as a resident, might be because I was naive and kind of a bubble, but nothing you do in that setting, it's kind of the most pure medicine there is. Nothing you do as a resident in training is dictated by cost. And it might be a kind of naive lens that you get to wear in that training period.
Yeah.
But you're essentially just trying to get patients the best possible treatments as quick as you can and get them healed and back to their life. And you're not factoring in anything else other than what's available for you to do in the hospital.
How do you fix that? And also, can you use new tech AI to fix that? Is there a way?
I think being able to see the outcomes is the best way to fix that. So what we were talking about of in real time for whatever disease you want to name, to see how are the outcomes evolving, how are the treatments working within the different risk stratifications of patients, you need to have the transparency to make a decision on evidence. Randomized trials are great.
Yep.
Small studies are great. But ultimately, if you want to change the way people treat patients to get back to that pure medicine, they actually need the info to make it happen. So things like open evidence, I think, are a huge step forward in that. It's not perfect. I've used it. It can give you an amazing snapshot of any question you have in real time. And if you want to go dig deeper, you're going to have to do a lot more work. But it'll hit the high notes very quickly where, things like that are getting to what I'm describing. It's not quite there because that's just scraping the literature, which is already behind what's going on in real time. So if you can even push that back further to EMR and claims data info being available to answer your questions, that's the biggest first step. Because I can tell you all day long ideas of how to fix the payment structure. They'll all be wrong if we don't have the info as to what to guide it towards. So if we start with the data, we start with the knowledge of what should be done clinically, I actually do have confidence the payment structures will follow. But right now, they're as limited as we are into their view of what works and what doesn't. and really how to pressure test that.
Last one, and I'll let you go after that. uh, where do you see uh, you know AI in wound care, in 5 and 10 years from now? So, do you see AI plus real world evidence, maybe even replacing RCTs? Do you see them doing something else? Do you see them? Do you see AI as a real companion to companies like yours in wound care? 5 and 10 years from now, and then what do you see them doing?
Yeah. I don't know if we're ever going to get away from randomized trials. I think ultimately that's the purest way to really control and see the effect of a product. It doesn't mean you can take those results and say it's going to work the same way in every single patient.
Yeah.
But that's kind of just the first step of saying, does this product work against, whatever the standard treatment is in a very controlled fashion? So I think randomized trials will always be there, especially to make sure products are safe. But once you kind of get that under your belt and you've proved it in at least the first use case, I really think AI can come in with the real world evidence to further kind of broaden that set of understanding where this is working, where it's not, and, label expanding off of that data. So I think that's going to be where it's accepted the earliest to actually make an impact within any field, but in wound care is to broaden the label of someone who's already done the first steps of an approval.
Mm.
And I, kind of like speaking before about the imaging technologies that exist now in wound care, those will continue to evolve. The more they become seamless with practice, the more they'll be used. And, there are other pieces coming out that, whether it's to help prevent ulcers from forming or to monitor how they're being treated. There's what's called a smart boot. So everyone who has diabetic foot ulcer wears a boot to offload pressure from the wound. There's now a smart boot that can track, how many steps are you taking on the wound? Of those steps, how many times are you wearing your boot? Just to keep people, the providers, the patients, and anyone else involved in the care of the patient informed as to, could I be doing a little bit better job of taking care of this wound in between visits to the physician? And then the physician being able to kind of track that progress with the imaging. So I think there's a lot of things that will help improve outcomes day to day, like the imaging, like the monitoring. And then all that can actually feed into the real world evidence. So it's only going to bolster the real world evidence we have to drive the field forward, because we're going to have wound images, wound sizes, and information about how often the patient's walking on top of the wound and how much that might be affecting the outcome more than anything else. It might be the most important factor.
Wow. Ned, this was fantastic. I honestly, did not expect it to connect with your answers as much as I did over this podcast, and especially with the product that you are building. As I said, I have a personal experience in there. So, as I said, more power to you and your team for building that. Thank you for being so real about the founder journey, about what's working at Polarity Bio, and about where AI is actually useful versus just the buzzwords. And for everyone watching, follow Polarity Bio's work. Skin Tea is doing something genuinely new in regenerative medicine. And if you're in wound care, do check out their expanded access program. If you got value from this, subscribe, share it with your team, drop a comment. Trust me, I read them all, even the nasty ones. So thank you. Till we see you next time. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.